Hello, do you want to make a start making art, but you're not quite sure where to begin? Perhaps you're not confident in your drawing skills, or maybe you don't feel that you've got the creativity that it takes. I want to show you a very simple method of getting started. All you need to be able to draw is three simple shapes: a circle, a triangle, a square, and a few simple lines. We're going to work from observation. This will help you to quickly produce a piece of work that looks intentional, that looks alive and based in reality, and that is aesthetically pleasing. In the first video in this series, I showed this in 3 stages with a still life, and in these videos I want to show you how I'm applying this to some different subjects. I'm starting with a landscape. So if you're ready, let's get started. I'm working from a reference photo because that's a very easy, convenient way to do this, and you can select whatever subject you want. First, I'm identifying the main shapes in the picture. A lot of triangles in this one, triangular shapes of land, the mountain itself of course in the background. And then there's the shapes of the cottage, and look carefully at what would be rectangles if you looked at it face on. Because the cottage is pointing away from us and the far end is further away, then we're getting the effects of perspective, and that's the lines that I'm pointing to at the moment, which I might draw in as some guidelines on the picture itself. One of the first things I'll need to do is just establish the general proportions of where things like the horizon line are, so that you can do that very roughly. It's about 1/3 of the way down, and I'm working on roughly the same proportions on paper for the image as for the photo. So I'm very lightly sketching it in first of all. I'm not going to rub anything out at this stage. I'm just going to put in the lines as carefully and directly as I can. So first of all, just sketching in those main shapes. And so again, you can see how the cottage would look face on in that little thumbnail sketch I did, but I'm establishing where the vanishing point is for the lines for the cottage, and I'm sketching in there the guidelines, the main perspective guidelines, which will form the top of the roof and the bottom of it, and then the bottom of the walls. And that gives a guide for tapering the rectangles that make up those shapes. I'm not trying to copy it exactly and get all the proportions exactly right. I just want to demonstrate the main principle of this at the moment. And I'm just sketching in those chimneys. So you'll see I'm not getting an exact match with it, but you can see what I mean anyway. Windows, of course, will follow the same perspective lines as the walls that they're in, so just remember to look carefully at the windows. Like the further window will be very slightly smaller than the one that's closer to. And you can see that effect as well in the fence, that it kind of tapers away from you into the image. For the other shapes of things like trees, I'm just using again simplified shapes, either circles or sometimes half circles if it seems like a more appropriate shape. And then I'm just putting in some marks to represent the trunks and the main branches of those trees. And now I can go over the lines I've done in pencil with a pen. I'm using a waterproof drawing pen so that I can then put some water-based colours over the top. You could of course use dry colours, you could use coloured pencils. I'm going to use some Inktense water-soluble pencils to add colour to this, because they produce some nice strong colours. So already you can see that we've got the main elements of the whole picture. And there's no need to worry about all the fine details in this. Just get the main points in, especially when you're doing your first one. Now I'm just adding the colour fairly lightly with these pencils because it is quite strong. Because the colours are quite strong once you add a watercolour wash a water wash over the top of them. These are really nice for sketching outdoors, especially if you haven't got a lot of time or you're in a position which is not very comfortable to sit outdoors. You can get your main colours in and then you can work them up later in a more comfortable spot. I'm just indicating the sky with a little bit of blue. I'm not going to try and get the whole thing. And if your original photo is maybe it's either cluttered a bit too much or some of the colours aren't quite so good, you've got complete freedom to adapt things as you wish in this version of it. And of course you can do a whole load of other versions if you want to. Now I'm just using a flat brush. It's just a flat watercolour brush, sort of medium width, and I'm starting with the lighter colours just because it's easier to wash off the brush in between. I'm not trying to get exact colour matches, but I'm trying to refer all the time to the reference photo. And of course things further away in the landscape tend to have a bit more of a sort of bluish grey and generally less colour saturated look to them. And that will straight away give the impression of distance and of some depth in your picture if you do this. And the colours that are closer to you are generally much more saturated and stronger. Often warmer too. So you can see I've got more yellow in the foreground. And I could probably have increased the contrast in this and made them darker still, but I was happy with this for a first attempt. I think it gives you the idea of what you can do with this very quickly and simply. Next, we'll look at a streetscape with some buildings. I'll show you how I've used this method to make some paintings. In the last video of the series, I'll show you how I apply this to a self-portrait study, and I'll also give you 3 tips that you can take away with you on the next stages of your creative journey.